series. The month of July, we've decided to make this a resource management topic month. So I'm going to kick things off with just talking about different resource management strategies, how to deal with planning of resources, considering skill types and such, and how best to communicate the information out to the organization. If you haven't been to our webinar series before, what we like to do is we'll mute the phone lines as is in place now. To get through the material, we'll open it up at the end for questions for about 10 minutes, 15 minutes afterwards. When I go to open up for questions, we will stop the recording, so feel free to ask any questions or say who you are or anything. It's not going to be captured as part of the video that's going to end up going out on YouTube. So with that, let's begin. Okay. And as always, we always like to start off with letting you guys know what's going on over here at Top Step, just so that you can feel free to participate wherever it makes sense or if we're available. Next week, we're going to be talking about the resource management, but in a specific PSA tools that we are involved with. So next week's is about open air and resource management. And in 2 weeks, we'll be talking about the Financial Force PSA solution and their approaches to resource management. So we hope you can join us for those tool-appropriate webinars. And for those of you who are in the Boston area and are open air customers of ours, we are having a Boston open air user group on July 21st. This is the first time we're doing a breakfast session, so bright and early, 7:30 in the morning in Boston. So we hope to see you there. So what we're going to cover over is really just talking about how to do planning of resources and how to do resource management, factoring in your skills and communication. So these are sort of the objectives of what we're going to try and cover in this quick 30-minute dialogue related to the resource management process and methodology in professional services organizations. So I like to look at resource management actually in two different ways. There's really two main models that apply to resource management. And it's not so much the technology or how the data is captured or the granularity. It's more of the who does it. Okay? So I like to categorize these as centralized resource management and decentralized resource management. And really, what does that mean? What does centralized and decentralized management mean? And in a nutshell, centralized resource management is all about having a central team of people that are responsible for scheduling. So you have your resource management team. It could be a team within the department if you wanted, but it could be more of a global team. They're responsible for the Americas or for the EMEA offices, and they are responsible for making sure that they understand who needs what kind of resource, and they go and coordinate with the different resource owners to find those resources, do the fulfillment, and basically keep track and keep a more proactive monitoring approach of the scheduling data in the system. So these are the folks that are the ones that have to rely very heavily on skill profile, skill management to understand what kind of skills do you need, and then use that information in your PSA tool to find resources that have that skill set, and based on their availability, if they would be a candidate to work on the project. Okay, so there's a heavier dependence, I believe, in a centralized model because you're dealing with people. Their job is to keep people scheduled and fully utilized and forecasted out based on need, but they don't necessarily know everyone in the organization, so they would have to rely on skills to find people, especially cross-department, cross-country, cross-product line. The decentralized model, though, is empowering more of the owners of the resource. So that could be department managers being the resource management team. It could be the project managers are scheduling resources. It basically is the people who need the resources are the ones that are actually doing the scheduling, or maybe their management is doing the scheduling. And that means more people are involved in the scheduling. That's why I call it decentralized. There are just more people involved with the whole scheduling process, which actually may reduce administration, may reduce bottlenecks, maybe make it a more speedy timeline. But what it also relies on is a heavier emphasis on process, maybe not so much an emphasis on skill sets, skill profiles and stuff, but a heavier emphasis on process, because it may be very easy for someone to go ahead and schedule their favorite person, and now that favorite person is scheduled 350%, and nobody can work a 36-hour workday no matter how hard you tried. So in a decentralized model, what I find is that it may minimize administration and overhead, but it heavily relies on process and training, and the managers of the people that managers of the resources become sort of the gatekeepers. They're the ones monitoring. They're more reactive. They're saying, I can't schedule Andrea anymore. She's already overscheduled. I need to find someone else to pick this work up. Because in many cases, the whole resource scheduling is driving your forecast. So if you have unrealistic scheduling, you do have unrealistic forecasts, right? So that's how I look at it, is centralized model, a central team that's, just kind of putting the puzzle together and keep on top of the puzzle and keep everyone as fully utilized as possible, and a decentralized model which may reduce administration, but it does rely more heavily on monitoring of data and reactive correction to make sure that the scheduling is appropriate. Now, the big question here is then, of course, well, which one should I be doing, and should I be doing both? And there are organizations that do both. It really depends on the different teams you have and the different professional services groups you have in the organization, maybe geographies. But a lot of it is dependent on your culture and how much your scheduling data changes. If you have longer projects that have more of a dedicated team feel, a decentralized model is perfect because it's just part of what the PM's doing day to day. If it's much more rapid, or you don't necessarily have a PM, you have more of a project lead, and you really need sort of rapid fire, I need somebody next week, who can I get? That might be more of a centralized model, just because there's a high turnover, high volume, there's a whole lot of work involved in finding the resource. So a centralized model may actually be the better solution to handle that churn and to have a focus group of people that just know how to do the scheduling aspect of it, okay? But there are a lot of different dependencies on making that decision, and it's a decision that drives, obviously, a lot of the ways that you would use a PSA in your organization. Now, from a resource planning perspective, how can you use the resource management, resource scheduling to do your resource planning? And, there's the basic of I need a person, okay? But really the question is I need, who's available that can do this? So I need this kind of person, right? So you end up setting up ways to make requests or ways to identify resource needs based on maybe it's a job category or a title, or it's a level, or if it's a specific skill set, like I need a Java developer, I need an Oracle DBA, I need an Apex coder. Those are skill sets, and they represent a specific type of person. So if you can do your resource planning keeping that in mind, you really are setting up sort of placeholder people many times to understand what the job category or the skill is that you need. And when you start doing that, you can start forecasting that information based on your scheduling, like how many hours you need for this kind of resource. And then if you fulfill that with an actual resource, you would see the forecast of hours for that resource, forecast utilization. You could forecast by type of resource. So you say, you know what, I'm going to forecast, I need 40 hours of, 120 hours of PMs next week, so I need 3 PMs. 2 of them are fulfilled, 1 person I don't have yet. I need to find someone who could do PM. Okay. And you can also look at not only the scheduling and the forecasting of it, if you're considering job categories or titles, you can also look at it from head count, like how many of these people do I need? How many project managers do I need? How many developers do I need? And rely on actual timesheets as a comparison to see how accurate your scheduling is by those resources. So the resource planning, if you can bring it down to a skill level, if you can bring it down to a job category, it does give you a lot of metrics and measures that allow you to understand what you need staffing-wise, what kind of resources you need in-house, okay? Especially how many of those resources you may need along the way. Okay. So really the takeaway from this whole resource planning thing is not necessarily saying I need a body. It's like I need what kind of body. So think in terms of setting up your resources with tags that understand what kind of person they are. Not whether they're nice or mean or anything like that, but what's sort of their general job category, maybe practice or skill set, or be able to identify resources by specific skill needs, Java developer, Apex coder, that kind of thing. Okay. Now, if you can do that, now you're able to you're able to schedule resources, whether it's decentralized or centralized model. You're able to schedule resources based on category. And so you say, I need Jody on this project, but Jody is tagged as this kind of person. I need a project manager, so now you have the ability to do searches by skill set to find these kind of people. Okay. When you're tagging people that way, you can make sure you have the right mix of people on a project versus just warm bodies to fulfill the staffing quota for a project. You really need to find out what people's roles are going to be on that project. So I definitely am a fan of skill profiles. The skill profiles themselves are a bit tricky, I think, in some cases for a PSA to track, because once you start tracking skills, you tend to start going down the path of, oh, but it would really be nice if I knew if I had anyone in-house that could speak Mandarin, okay? Unless there's a need in your organization to eventually search for someone who can speak Mandarin, I would argue you should not track that in the skill database because it actually just adds information to a skill database that won't be leveraged with the power of the tools doing findings of resource by skill finds. Okay. The other challenge I see with scheduling resources and sort of forecasting out resource needs is when you have a type of organization where people can fulfill multiple roles. This is where I could be a PSA implementation person, consultant. I could be the project manager. I could be the data migration lead. I could be all these different things because of my skill set. If you're in that kind of organization where you have more of a multiple role, multiple delivery capability type person, the approach that I tend to take with customers is still set up your resource needs based on the type of person you need. I need a project manager, I need a data migration lead. But when that resource is found, then you're really looking at multiple aspects of their skill profile. Can they do this? And if they can do this, then great, you staff them to the project, but you staff them in that role. And that gives you some metrics on how much, how much time from an actual perspective and from a scheduling perspective, how much time do I need from PMs? How much time do I need from Apex coders, right? Bringing that sort of mix of resources can fulfill multiple roles. It does become tricky when you're forecasting resource need, but you still should have the ability to say, this is the number of hours for this type of person, okay? And it may not be, this is how many hours I need Jody for. I just need this many hours of a PM. So it's a different view of the data, but you're still looking at the information according to the category. So again, it kind of comes back to skill profiles and what you want to plan for as far as headcount is concerned. But it is a trickier one because if people can fulfill multiple roles, it's hard to split somebody into 4 or 5 pieces when it comes to resource planning. Okay. If you can write reports to give you that information, like how busy is Jody, but also write another version of the report that says how busy are people, how many hours of a PM do I need, how many head count of a PM do I need. That information will look very different, especially if you have people that can cover multiple roles. But it will give you good insight into where you need to spend time educating your resources or maybe hiring additional resources simply because you need 7 PMs and you have enough people to cover maybe 3 or 4 PM head count. in the system based on people's capabilities. So maybe those project lead people get a little more training on project management so that they can start covering that and adding that to their skill portfolio. Right? So it kind of comes back to the demand of roles and what projects are really needing. Okay. The capacity, we're going to talk a little bit more about capacity in a couple slides, but capacity is really the metric of forecasting resource need based on what do I have on staff right now. Forecasting capacity based on the fact that Jody can spend 25% of her time as a PM and 25% of her time as a PSA implementation person. That's actually very difficult to do. That requires some kind of controls in the system per person, which are very subjective, I believe. But capacity should really reflect who do you have on staff and what is their primary reason to being on staff. So capacity of project managers, I would look at the people who are actually tagged as project managers. They may be able to do other things like data migration leads or integration leads, but their primary role is project manager. So I would use their primary role as the capacity driver. From a demand driver, the various roles that they could pick would be part of my demand metric, but my capacity metric, which is what do I have, would have to be related to a primary role that they serve in the organization. Okay. As you're using that skill profile and you're looking at capacity by primary role, and you're looking at demand based on just the resource planning aspect of it, the resource planning by the category or the main skill set needed, that actually drives the way that you can look at the data to say, I do need to have more people that can do project management. That can drive career decisions. That can drive career discussions with your team to say, hey, I see that you haven't become PMP certified. That would be something I think that would be beneficial to you as well as to the organization. Okay. The one thing that I do like to do, and it may be overlooked occasionally in the grand scheme of resource planning, is forecasting is an art, scheduling is an art. Trying to figure out how accurate you can be in scheduling is something that I think is worthwhile measuring because the accuracy of your forecast many times is dependent on your resource scheduling. So as you're scheduling your resources, not only check, hey, I scheduled you to work 40, I see you only work 30, but also look to say, hey, I scheduled 40 hours of a PM, but I ended up getting 65 hours of a PM. Did I put somebody in the wrong role? Or did I underestimate the effort that was required for this type of role on this project? So if you can capture some of those metrics of your actual versus your plan from a scheduling perspective, that will also give you pause into, hey, this project manager always asks for somebody full-time and they never need them full-time, and they're always, the person is always underutilized. So how can I make sure I work with that person in a different way, for example? Now I want to switch to, as far as the centralized or decentralized model, and then how you can plan resources, really focusing on that job category, that skill, and then understanding capacity versus demand. The whole resource planning activity in a PSA really communicates different things to different people, okay? And really the communication is based on why do you need to use the data, as you would assume. So in the case of management, so why would management need to leverage data about scheduling in the tool? A lot of it is related to how busy are my people? And there's a lot of metrics related to that. So bench visibility, how many people are sitting around apparently doing nothing according to your scheduling. So of course your scheduling has to keep up to date so it doesn't look like people are not busy when they actually are. Understanding what your demand versus capacity is, so understanding how many headcount that I have on staff versus what I need to hire, because that starts turning into real cost to the company. If you start hiring people, you find out all your scheduling data is really over projected at the end of the day. And then really understanding projects, when are projects finishing, when are people rolling off. At a higher level, maybe some of those projects are something that are key accounts that executives need to be aware of so they can schedule some surveys and some visits afterwards. along with process controls. Now, if you're a project manager, you're looking at the PSA resource scheduling in a different way. You're looking at it to understand who's available so I can grab them for my project, right? That's not a bench, that's sort of a play on bench visibility, but the PM doesn't really care how much people are on the bench. They care who are the right people available for me. So they're looking at that white space on the schedule to say, hey, Jody's available on Tuesday, I'm going to grab her. Okay? You also want to understand if the people that you have working on your team are also scheduled on other stuff. So is my project potentially at risk because one of my key persons is working on 2 or 3 projects at the same time? And I would argue that's something very valuable for a PM to be aware of. And obviously they may find that out by talking with their person, but if they're seeing it visibly in the schedule, they may find out that the person, they need to work with that person to understand where their project work is in priority to the other stuff that they're working on. Okay. And then simply being able to view resource availability and understand how to ask for people. So that could be something that you do through email. That could be something that you have the PMs do through the system so PMs can see how resource requests are competing with each other. But that's all basically how a PM would interact with the PS tool along the way. Now, down to the end user level, the person who's actually doing the work, really that communication is, what am I supposed to be working on, right? So what are my priorities? Who are my PMs? What's my time frame or my dedication? What should I be doing, okay? And project managers, that's their responsibility, right, to coordinate with their team and say, here's what I need you to do, here's when I need you to do it, and here's how much time I've given you to do it. But if a team member can see that inside the tool, they can actually be more proactive about looking up things on their own dashboard, their own self-service dashboard. And it also gives them visibility to see what other people are working on, perhaps, and help them out if they find that they have some availability, they find that they're sitting on the bench, and they look over and they see someone else is like double scheduled. They could step in and help out. Okay. Now, some key management metrics, we touched on these briefly, but the resource scheduling and understanding who's available in that's all sort of process, basic operational management type things. But there are some key metrics that you want to be able to take away, and that's really demand versus capacity. So what does demand versus capacity really mean when it comes to a management metric? So how many do I have on staff, and how much am I actually using them from a forecast perspective as well from an actuals perspective? So a couple of different versions of demand versus capacity. And I like this metric for managers to keep on top of because it also allows you to understand when you need to hire and factor in the ramp-up time it takes for new people to come up to speed and be as productive as the seasoned vets that are on the team. Okay, so to come up with demand and capacity, I like to look at things in terms of hours, but also in money. So things like target bill rates and target utilization. How many hours do I expect people to be billable, and what's the average bill rate that I would expect them to bill out at? So your capacity measure really becomes how many hours do I expect people to work? What's the calendar that they're working against? What's the target they have to hit? So 75% of a 20/80 schedule, 90% of a calendar minus holidays, minus vacation, minus training budget, minus travel. All those are ways to say how many hours should a person be hitting. And then you have to figure out what kind of people are factored into this capacity measure. So is it employees? Is it employees plus retained resources that are basically full-time? Is it a subset of employees because not everyone is billable? You have to be realistic about who's really driving the money in the organization and have them be the ones that are factoring into your capacity metric. And then your bill rate. So your PSA tool is probably also the thing that you're doing a lot of your billing, your project management, your financial tracking with. So you should be able to trend this metric very easily and understand what is an average bill rate, what is a target bill rate, and what bill rate do you need to achieve in the organization to be able to reach revenue goals. That bill rate can be a default that you'll use as a basic metric where you take and you multiply these 3 factors together, and therefore you come up with, I have enough people on staff to hit $3.1 million. Okay. And if I need to hit $3.5 million, guess what? Either one of these has to change. Like you either have to make people work harder, longer hours, you need to increase your bill rate, or you need to hire, right? And which one is the easier of the two? Which one is the easier of the 3 to change? And which one is the longer term investment that will continue to support the company growing? And I would argue hiring resources is the longer term investment to keep the company growing versus the short term of let me just bump up my bill rate. Okay. So all of these measures are something that your PSA tool can natively track, should be tracking, and then combining these together into a capacity dashboard can give you that headcount need, that money need. Tagging that also with the type of resource they are, now I have capacity of project managers, and do I have enough project managers on staff to meet the demand that I'm getting through resource scheduling based on the different skill or job category that I'm tracking. Okay. And then of course you can't not talk about utilization when you talk about resource management. Utilization is more of the actuals. There's always forecast utilization. Forecast utilization tends to focus on billable time, but you can, of course, accommodate non-billable time, training time, that kind of thing, depending on your scheduling strategy. But the actual utilization comes from that time capture. And here, I always work with customers and try to have them think about what goes beyond billable and non-billable. It's great that's a basic metric to measure, but what does non-billable mean, and where am I spending my hours? If I'm spending all my non-billable hours on sales support, that's actually a pretty productive thing for somebody to be doing versus sitting on the bench waiting for work to come in, right? So I like to track it and break it down into further categories like travel time, marketing, training or mentoring of other people, which gives me a sense for where people are spending their time and how they're building themselves as well as the company, okay? And in a utilization metric, you certainly have to define your numerator and your denominator to be able to have an understanding of what that percentage really means, and then using some kind of time tagging, whether it's on time cards or part of milestones or part of the project itself. Those are all ways to categorize what kind of time you're actually dealing with. So in this very quick session, I try to cover an end-to-end reason why resource management is a key factor in professional services automation tools. There definitely is a decision that has to be made regardless of the tool of what's the process you need to follow. Who's responsible for the scheduling? Who's responsible for making sure it's accurate? Who's responsible for keeping it up to date? But I would say not only scheduling people and bodies, you really need to factor in what do they represent? Are they representing a skill, a category, and how you're able to take that down to a lower level of detail to understand the kinds of resources you need to have on staff and the kinds of resources that you may need to develop in the organization based on staff that you already have. I'm a very graphical person, so when it comes to reporting and metrics, I really like dashboards because they speak to me more than numbers. Some of you may be numbers people and you're the opposite. Either way, you should have those dashboards and those reports in place. All that data is in your PSA. There's no reason really not to pull it out of the PSA and get that in a more automated sense versus putting everything in Excel and trying to do a lot of time doing a data analysis. Right? My key takeaway at the end of this whole thing is the resource management functionality in many of the PSA tools is actually very easy to adopt. It's very easy to use. It's very easy to understand how to use it. The adoption challenge that I find with the majority of customers is making sure you're keeping the data actually up to date. It's easy to create something, but then remembering to go back and change it when the project slips or where an unfortunate situation comes out and the resources are no longer available. Those are things that you don't necessarily directly think about resource scheduling, but that's the bigger challenge in adoption is making sure you keep that up to date. And if you can have your PSA do like reminders or set up cadence meetings or something to help with that challenge, that'll go a long way to making sure the data is actually very accurate.